Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Spirits in the Studio. I'm Nancy and I am a visionary and intuitive artist. Today I'm here to talk about my latest celebrity spirit portrait, that of Marvin Gaye. A spirit portrait is a portrait of a person as their higher self, surrounded by their power animals and sacred botanicals. All right, without further ado, let's get started and talk about Marvin. Marvin was a magical musical genius. He was born in 1939 in Washington, D.C. to a violent, cross-dressing, Pentecostal preaching father and a loving and a supportive mother. Marvin sang in his church choir as a child, and that was a great escape for him to get away from the trouble at home with his father. Marvin grew up to become the Prince of Motown. That is often how he is labeled in the music industry. And later he got to be the captain of his own musical ship. Because he had so many hits, it gave him a lot of creative license within the industry. He wrote genre-bending hits like What's Going On. He was gifted, addicted, and afflicted though, however. Marvin straddled the chasm of divorce, drug-fueled paranoia, and big problems with the IRS. So what power animals redirected this romantic? And which botanicals dared to dance with his devils? Let's dive in. First, the power animals and unicorn. Unicorn is a power animal to all who share its strong creative energies. Its powerful alicorn connects and directs attunement to other dimensions where creativity flows, and also where wounds can heal. Marvin certainly had a lot of wounds from his childhood. The relationship between him and his father was extremely antagonistic, and his father used to beat him with a belt. This relationship really plagued Marvin his entire life, and it was a major theme. But coming back to how I decided to paint unicorn, it had a lot to do with how the colors flowed on my background. I was doing a loose wash, not having any agenda, not yet knowing what the power animals would be. And when I discovered unicorn, it made perfect sense that this billowing pink and purple would be its mane. And I saw it as kind of a fairy dust laden, soft, billowy escape from unicorn to Marvin. And it was also offered as a nice alternative to what Marvin was trying to get out of drugs and alcohol. Moving on to Dolphin, down here in the corner. Dolphin swam into Marvin's childhood to help him deal with the duality of his father, and later on to help Marvin ride his own waves away from rote commercial musical formulas. So as far as the duality of Marvin's father, he had to deal with a man who was a preacher, kind of fire and brimstone, yet he came home and he was violent and unloving to his own children. He also liked to wear women's clothing, and back then at that time, in no way was that acceptable, and certainly not in this kind of church. So that was very confusing for Marvin. And I think Dolphin was present in Marvin when he strayed from using the traditional musical formulas that were historically very successful at Motown. And Marvin downloaded the song What's Going On, which it's hard to understand, but at the time, this melody and message was completely new. And the founder of Motown Records, Berry Gordy, thought this song was the worst thing he'd ever heard, and it was uncommercial, and it was way too political, and the public would not enjoy listening to it. But Marvin was very stubborn. He insisted that it be released, and when it finally was, in 1971, it was an instant smash hit. So Marvin and Dolphin followed their instincts, and they were right. The next power animal I want to talk about is Ant. Hard to see there, sitting on the white button of his jacket. Ant is like Dolphin, and inspired Marvin not to worry too much about the business side and the money side of things, and to focus on his inspiration. Ant also blessed Marvin with a certain knowing that the big hits are felt and not bought. For example, it was said that Marvin wasn't really motivated by money. It sounds like he made a lot of mistakes with it, and those could have been motivated by his drug use or influenced by his drug use. But as a personality, he didn't really care about money. He wanted artistic control, and he wanted to express his voice and not worry about the numbers. He did eventually get a lot of artistic freedom while he was still signed with Motown. And he got it because he churned out hits like What's Going On, Mercy, Mercy Me, and Let's Get It On. Wasp, however, wielded very painful stings to Marvin, because in spite of his charm and his great looks and his success, Marvin was a little bit arrogant and he had chaotic patterns. So Wasp loves symmetry and sacred geometry. So Wasp wanted nothing to do with this chaos, and he wanted to put Marvin on an organized path towards musical success and creation. And I say Marvin was a little bit arrogant because he was known to be hard to work with, which suggests he did not always acknowledge the gifts and efforts of other artists. And I say he was chaotic because he was known to struggle with paranoia, typical of heavy cocaine use. And this may also have been a symptom of the abuse in his childhood. Marvin was convinced that people were trying to kill him. In the later part of his career, he was. He kept a lot of guns around, and he suffered from depression. It is believed that in the last months of his life, he was even suicidal. In spite of all this, Marvin was capable of collaboration. He did produce some big hits with partnership. And so maybe it was Wasp who led him to do that. Sparrow is a common companion of creatives. I think Sparrow flew in to carry Marvin away from the overwhelm of physical things in the third dimensional reality in which Marvin was living. Sparrow knows that people fly much higher if they're not carrying the weight. And in Marvin's case, he was carrying the weight of depression, paranoia, and major financial woes. Between 1979 and 1981, Sparrow carried Marvin away to Hawaii, and for part of that time, Marvin lived in a van in utter simplicity, as Sparrow would suggest. And by the way, thank you for listening and watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if this content is of value to you. Now we're on to the botanicals. We have milk thistle. Milk thistle, in Marvin's particular case, has this message: paranoia will destroy ya. Milk thistle, as a healing botanical, is a healer of the liver, and interestingly, liver is an organ that energetically stores anger, and people who abuse drugs and alcohol often have anger that they are suppressing and numbing with the drugs that they take, and this puts them on a vicious cycle of sickening the liver more and more and more. And milk thistle is on a mission to break that pattern and heal the liver and the person. Next is tobacco. Back here and down there, I painted in some tobacco leaves, and tobacco is about paying your respects. It is an offering. And tobacco, like wasp, came forward for Marvin because he was so notoriously difficult to work with. He was moody and perfectionistic. He seemed to often show through his behavior that he didn't feel he needed assistance from anyone else. Also, being married into the Gordy/Motown family, Marvin married Berry Gordy's sister, Anna, which kind of raised his status at Motown. It certainly must have helped his career, even though he was extraordinarily gifted in his own right. Marvin even said he felt he didn't really have to do everything the other artists were expected to do, and tobacco does not like this kind of entitled thinking. Tobacco is all about humility, paying respects, and that is why tobacco is such a common offering in indigenous cultures. It's what they offer to show respect to spirit and the great creator. Well, that concludes this spirit portrait, which is a portrait and a reading in one. The material here is taken from my Substack. If you like this content, please do read and subscribe to my Substack as well. There's a lot more material that tells Marvin's story in that post, and I will put the link down below. So thank you again, and until next time, may your power animals be with you.